Welcome to the Canadian Philosophy Show. My name is Nicole Kirigin, and I'm here with Michael Robert Caditz and Mark Giles. I am from Fraser University, and I'm a third-year philosophy student, and I'm happy to be here. And I'll let Mark introduce himself first.
Thanks, Nikki. My name's Mark Giles. I'm from Fraser University. I have quite an interest in philosophy.
And my name is Michael Robert Caditz. Yeah. Michael Caditz. I'm a alumnus of Vancouver Island University. And I got that word right. You know, a lot of people say alumni when they mean alumnus, because alumni is plural and alumnus is singular. So that shows that I graduated with some intelligence.
You know your grammar.
Yeah.
Congratulations.
Yeah, it's part of philosophy, right? Yeah.
Exactly. Anyway, so today we are talking about a contentious topic, and this is actually a part 2. So Michael and I talked about vaccine passports last week, and we are revisiting the topic with our lovely friend Mark Giles here, and he will be offering some of his perspectives as well. So I want to start off the topic by saying that vaccine passports have been and are a very contentious topic. There are many heated debates from many sides of the political spectrum. From one side, is that vaccine passports are proposed to give us a way to go back to normal society, to live a normal life, bring back a sense of normalcy. And that has been something that we have virtually all have been lusting for and aiming for, because we have been living in such a hard time right now in the sense that we have to change our lifestyle, we have to change our routine. It's impacting some people's mental health. So going back to a normal life, or a sense of a normal life, is a very good idea for many people, and I also think it's a great idea as well. But the argument here will be, will vaccine passports actually restore a sense of normalcy? And we will go into that later on. A really contentious con argument of vaccine passports are that they will invade privacy and invade our sense of freedom and lead to the government having more control than they already do over us. And in a way, that's also a good topic to think about and a good concern, because there are some issues with privacy here that we will bring up. However, our goal today is to look at the pro and con arguments, examine them into detail, talk about the merits of these arguments, and then come to a consensus. And we will spend around the first half of the show talking into detail more about these pro and con arguments. And then at the latter half of the show, Michael, Mark, and I will have a discussion, and we'll debate on where we should actually go with vaccine passports, if they are a good idea, if it's even realistic to implement them, and other things like that. So actually, I will ask Michael, can you start with what you think about vaccine passports and I guess the heated nature of the debates around them?
Well, what I think as a philosopher is that there are arguments on both sides. And it's one of those topics that I actually don't have a strong opinion on. And I've been, waiting, as a good philosopher should do, until I weigh, both sides of the issue and hear all of the arguments on both sides. And I know that Nicole, you and I have discussed this before, and also on the show we've discussed it. And so now I'm more familiar with the arguments. And I'm actually starting to form my own judgment now about which side I think is stronger. But I'm not going to divulge that at this moment. I'm going to wait. I'm going to let it develop throughout the show, because now I actually do have a side that I'm going to take.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, thank you for hinting towards that. I wonder what you're going to say too, Michael. And Mark, I'll let you go forward. I guess you have been also exposed to the debates surrounding vaccine passports, and where do you fall coming into this, or maybe not in terms of one side or the other, but what are your preliminary thoughts here?
Well, yeah, it of course is hard to make a choice, but I think my initial feeling is that the pros outweigh the cons, and my feeling is that I guess we're in a very new era. Well, maybe not so new, but I mean, I feel like all the potential concerns, they are more like theoretical. Whereas, yeah, I guess, I mean, all the benefits from it is such as having a COVID passport, I think definitely would help us get back and return to society, as it were.
Thank you for sharing. So I'm going to give some examples of, firstly, what are we lacking in society as a result of COVID and also exacerbated by the COVID-19 pandemic. One thing that we are currently lacking in society is social contact and connection. So, for example, the ability to date, and not over online, see your family, see your friends, interact in person, see each other's social, like verbal cues, social cues, those things. We are lacking those right now. Of course, platforms like Zoom and online video conferencing can replace some of that, but it would be rash to say that it does replace all that we're missing from social connection. So that is one thing that we are currently lacking. Another thing that we're currently lacking is economic stability. And of course, you can make the argument that we lacked economic stability before, especially if you're a listener in Vancouver or the Lower Mainland, you know about the housing instability in the housing market. So you could make the argument that economic stability was, a little bit messed up before the COVID-19 pandemic, but of course it is more messed up now. So people are having issues with job security, poverty is increasing, and all these other things here, okay? And then number 3, personal safety. Okay, both protection against COVID-19, access to healthcare. For example, elective surgeries are now getting postponed because of the COVID-19 numbers. And also people don't feel safe to go into hospitals, so they are either not seeking the medical care that they normally would, or they don't have access to that. So personal safety is a concern. Autonomy is a concern. Your ability to make your own choices, your ability to do what you would do in a normal routine, that has also been impacted. Another thing that has been impacted is the sense of progress and accomplishment. Time feels slowed on a very much so basis. I feel like I'm just often drifting through life. Time isn't passing by normally. It is my birthday very soon, and I don't even feel like it's my birthday soon. And I don't think it's just because I'm getting older. Time feels very, very, very weird right now, and that impedes, and that interferes and impedes with progress and accomplishment, because you can kind of almost fall into a sense of being passive. And number 6 here is something that we're lacking is certainty and predictability. And I think that's a really big thing for many people. It's a big thing for your sense of mental health, your sense of well-being, your sense of routine. We don't know what's coming next. We can guess about what's coming next. And you can make the argument that before the COVID-19 pandemic, we didn't know what was coming next either. But even now more so, I think that it's harder to predict what's coming next. And that is something that has been impacting many people. And now there are ways to somewhat fix these problems, or at least improve these problems. One obvious way to fix these problems or improve these problems is to eradicate the COVID-19 virus. And then that would be with hopes that things would go back to pre-pandemic normals. We can't make that as a guarantee. Things will never be the same as they were before, but things will have a greater chance of being the same. Another way that we can bring things back to normal is to move things online. And I guess that partially fulfilled some of our lacks and our missing things in our lives, but it only partially fulfilled the things that we were missing. And number 3, what we're talking about today are vaccine passports. This is a new proposition to help bring things back to a sense of normalcy. And what we will be doing is we will be discussing what is the likelihood that vaccine passports will actually meet this goal, because many of the arguments here in favor of vaccine passports are saying that or are claiming that vaccine passports will bring us back to a sense of normalcy. And we will critically examine to see if this will actually be a reality or if it's likely to be a reality. And I think it will be an interesting discussion. So I will stop here for comments from either Michael or Mark. Do you have anything to say?
I just wanted to comment on what you said, Nicole, just now, that one way of returning to normal is going online, and I don't agree with that because I don't think that's going back to normal. If we're forced to conduct our work lives, our school lives, our personal lives, our medical appointments online, that's not normal. So I think I would say, from my point of view, that going online rather than going places in physical person is an adaptation rather than a return to normal, and it's not sufficient in the long run. Yeah.
It's a way of partially fulfilling what we're missing, but it'll never fully fulfill what we're missing.
Yeah, it's sort of like a non-perfect simulation of what normal was, I suppose. Like, it's there, but it's not really, you know?
Definitely. Okay, so now I will dive into the pro arguments for vaccine passports, and we will be examining these largely line by line, and I'll be going back to my co-hosts here and asking what they think about each pro argument. So I'm going to start off with that the pro argument for vaccine passports are that they might incentivize more people to get vaccinated, which would help eradicate the virus. This is one proposed pro argument. And what I would say to this argument is that we know that vaccines can help slow transmission of the virus, but this is not a 100% proven, I guess, thing in science. And we might later find out that vaccines are better than we thought they were, or conversely, not as great as we thought they were. So it's not necessarily true that having vaccines will stop the virus entirely. It definitely will help slow the virus, but that was what I would say to that pro argument, that getting vaccine passports might incentivize people to get vaccinated, which is good because it'll help eradicate the virus. And if anyone else has any comments on that one, you can speak up, and then otherwise I'll move on.
Yeah, I sort of feel it's a bit of a weird argument, because my feeling is that, like, most people genuinely do want to get vaccinated, and the, like, few who don't are generally, like, you know, skeptical herd skeptics, I guess, who I would feel, you know, I don't know, have quite an extreme view that I don't think such a incentive would overturn. And I do think that generally, once most of the population who actually does want to get the vaccination, you know, we will develop a type of herd immunity. That would work pretty well.
Thank you, Mark.
Yeah, I want to disagree with a couple things you said, Nicole. First of all, I think the evidence, the scientific evidence, is overwhelming that that the vaccines are highly effective, and when a sufficient percentage of the population is vaccinated, indeed the transmission rates drop way down. And so the clinical trials showed that, but it's real life is also showing that. I'll just give you a few examples off the top of my head. So in Prince Rupert, British Columbia, there was a very high incidence of COVID transmission, and so the province made an exception to their to the age-based distribution of the vaccine, and they flooded Prince Rupert with vaccines, and now I think 70 or 80% of the population of Prince Rupert has been vaccinated, and the incidence of COVID has plummeted way down to almost nothing. And there's other examples of places like in California, for example, where a high percentage of people have been vaccinated. There's also been a dramatic decrease in the rate of COVID transmission. And there's many other examples in the world. Taiwan is another example of where there's high vaccination rates and also high adherence to distancing rules. And indeed, the virus has not completely disappeared, but the rate is very low now in many of those places. So I think the evidence is overwhelming. Scientific evidence is overwhelming that there is a such thing as quote-unquote herd immunity, that when a sufficient percentage of the population is vaccinated, then the virus is blocked from spreading. Mostly, not 100%. I mean, there are some breakthrough cases, but the breakthrough cases, I suspect, won't be enough to allow the virus to continue to proliferate.
Thank you for sharing, Michael. I think you're absolutely right, and I appreciate that you're bringing up this scientific and also clinical evidence has come out. I will say the statement again. So one of the pro arguments for vaccine passports is that it might incentivize more people to get vaccinated, which would help eradicate the virus. My thing that the part that I'm looking at right now is the word eradicate. I don't think it is entirely possible or probable that the virus will be entirely eradicated. But it's likely that it might not be as harmful or not be as risky. And in that sense, colloquially, it will be eradicated. But I don't think like as on a really like logical basis, like if you say like on a 1-for-1 basis, it's eradicated or not eradicated, I don't think it's super likely that it will be entirely eradicated. But it is likely that the virus will lose its hold on the population in terms of their risk. And that is one part there. So I'm going to move on to the next pro argument here for vaccine passports, in favor of vaccine passports, is that vaccine passports will give justice for people who have gotten the vaccine to lead more normal lives. It is an incentive for people who have gotten the vaccine to live more normal lives. And because they've gotten the vaccine, it's a way to reward them. So do you guys have any thoughts on that statement there?
Well, I don't. My initial feeling is that sort of framing it as a reward, I guess, is a bit of a, I think, not really too good of a way to put it, because if you frame it as such a thing, then it's almost as though that because you're listening to the government, then they, I guess, they decide for you to go out and live a normal life, or they sort of choose, right, who and which one of people should go out and live normal lives, while other people, maybe they don't deem as, I guess, good at listening to not have that choice. And I feel like the way you should frame it is that, like there's no harm in letting people who are vaccinated go out and about their normal business. So just to let them do that, right? Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah. Can I express that point in my way? The way I would put that point in the argument in favor of vaccine passports is that people who get vaccinated are acting responsibly. And they're acting responsibly because the overwhelming scientific evidence is that the risk of side effects of vaccines are very low. And the evidence is overwhelming, likewise, as I said before, that the benefits of reaching community immunity or herd immunity are great. That is the pathway to return to normal life and to, address and solve all the problems that you laid out, to mitigate all the problems that you laid out at the beginning, Nicole, all the negative effects of the pandemic. So people who get vaccinated are acting responsibly. People who don't get vaccinated are saying, well, I have personal freedom and I'm not going to do my part. I'm not going to do my part in helping society go back to normal. So I think the way I would articulate the argument in favor of rewarding people, or if we don't want to use the word rewarding, we can say that people who act responsibly and are doing their part to rid society of the virus deserve, and it's reasonable for them to be given privileges of whatever the vaccine passport allows them to do, which we haven't defined, but I assume it would be things like maybe traveling or going to hotels or going to restaurants, that they deserve those things because they've acted responsibly. So I think it's it's just. I think it's just that people who act responsibly get more privileges, and people who act irresponsibly and irrationally have to be restricted.
Thank you, Michael. I'm going to move on to the next point here. So another pro argument in favor of vaccine passports is that it will allow for more social contact and connection with respect to the population who also got the vaccine and has a vaccine passport. So in other words, people who get the vaccine and have a vaccine passport will be able to socialize and selectively socialize with people who they know also have a vaccine and a vaccine passport, which is proposed to, or at least hypothetically, will lower transmission because you will be socializing with people or choosing to socialize with people who you know have the vaccine.
Yeah, I mean, I think social contact is definitely really important, and I think it's, more important than, I guess, how we generally look at it, especially on an existential level. If you look at Japan, for instance, I remember reading a report that actually a few months ago, the increase in suicide was actually greater than the deaths due to COVID. So it does pose like a funny situation where that I guess the lockdown has its own consequences, right? And perhaps it's maybe in some cases worse than COVID. Maybe at least in Japan. But
Be an argument for that in terms of drug use and mental health issues as a result of the pandemic. Those issues might be longer lasting than the effects of the pandemic itself. So there can be definitely an argument made for that. Thank you, Mark, for sharing. I'm going to move on to the next point here. So that another pro argument in terms of having vaccine passports is that vaccine passports may improve access to healthcare services which have been closed due to the pandemic. So for example, it doesn't necessarily have to be just viewed in the lens of doctor appointments or going to the hospital, but for example, going to physiotherapy or going to get a massage or going to, to your chiropractor or something like that, or even going to your psychologist. A lot of these services, since they are done privately, and so each practitioner usually has their own private office. They decide who they're going to see. They decide if they want to see clients in person. They decide if they want to even open their practice during the pandemic. I know several psychology offices that are not open because of the pandemic. So arguably having a vaccine passport could improve access to those, or at least access to better quality services if you don't like online services. That's one argument there. I'm going to move on to the next point. So another pro argument in favor of vaccine passports is that, so it increases the realm of opportunities for people to make daily choices about their lives.
I mean, I can agree with this. I mean, it feels like they sort of repeat themselves, I guess, you know, when there's limited social contact and the lockdown, right? So, yeah, that's probably also why it's making it seem as though time's going quicker.
Do you have any comments here?
I'm thinking about all the counter arguments, which I'm gonna bring up pretty soon.
You will bring up, yes.
Yeah.
I can move on to the next.
Yeah,
if
go ahead.
you would like.
Yeah.
All right. So another pro argument in favor of vaccine passports is that vaccine passports have the ability or opportunity to open up society more, leading to more opportunities for progress and accomplishment. So, for example, job opportunities might become more available if society opens up more. You can perhaps you can have meetings with colleagues to decide a side project or open up your own business or other things like that. You can give many different examples that could highlight how opening up society might lead to more opportunities for progress and accomplishment. If you any of Marco or Michael, if you have anything to say here, feel free to add. Could we do this online to the same extent as in person?
Probably not, to be honest. I mean, there is definitely perhaps a certain amount that perhaps, you know, that through the internet we can simulate certain parts of our lives, but there definitely is some sort of barrier to that. And well, I guess it really depends on your lifestyle, right, and what you do in your daily life. But I don't think for most of us it comes closer to being sufficient.
Thank you, Mark. So I'll move on to the next pro argument, and then after this we'll go on to con arguments. So the next pro arguments in favor of vaccine passports is that opening up society may and is very likely to have benefits for the mental health and overall well-being of the populace. This is a point I think we should talk about.
Well,
it will have benefits for people who have the vaccine passports, but the people without the vaccine passports won't benefit. And there's various reasons why people might not have vaccine passports. So that's actually going into the counter argument, but I just wanted to point out that when you're arguing for vaccine passports by saying, oh, now people can go back to their mental health services and now people can go back to their, free lives, I just wanted to point out you're talking about a certain segment of the population that has the passport. Not everyone.
Thank you, Michael.
yeah, I suppose there's also people who, are too weak to get the vaccine. I know there are people, some children, I think people who are going through chemotherapy, for instance, their bodies are like too weak to get a vaccine. So, yeah, it might not even be a choice for some people.
It depends. I know that I did some research on this in terms of who absolutely cannot medically get the COVID-19 vaccines. Children under 16 can't get the vaccine, at least not yet. It's not approved in their age group unless there has been recent changes that I'm not aware of. And people who have allergies to mRNA vaccines, who have had an anaphylactic reaction, they cannot get these vaccines. And then for people who are considered clinically extremely vulnerable, like people who are on immunosuppressants or people who have had transplants or people who are on chemotherapy, it is a choice for them based on their clinical situation with their doctor. Their doctor won't always say it's okay or a good idea for them to get the vaccine, depending on their situation. But some situations in which people that are clinically extremely vulnerable are in, sometimes they can get the COVID-19 vaccine, but it's a decision that their doctor has to make with the patient. And it's not always going to be the case 100% of the time. So that's some information there. So now we're going to move on to con arguments for vaccine passports. So some con arguments here are that we are not clear about what exactly vaccine passports would allow us to do. Who would make decisions based on what opens up to those with vaccine passports? Are these only going to be public agencies like the government or public health, or do private corporations also get to decide? Okay, so
Yeah.
I'll move on to the next con argument. How long would it take to establish the bureaucratic aspect of vaccine passports, and how many resources would this take? Because, believe it or not, vaccine passports can't just be implemented tomorrow if there has been no work behind it. There has to be legislation behind it in order to make sure that they're following equity laws, that they're protecting privacy, that everything is in line with our laws as a country. And it will take a huge bureaucratic process to actually enact and put forward these vaccine passports. It can't just be done very quickly. And we know that having these bureaucratic processes does take taxpayer money. It costs the government's money. It's not free. It's something that is time consuming. These things don't happen overnight. So that's one con argument, or even implausibility argument there. And then if anyone wants to say anything there, you can, Michael or Mark. Otherwise, I'll move on to the next con argument.
Yeah, I wanted to add that it's speculation that governments or businesses or private companies could even logistically work such a thing out. As you said, it may be implausible. I mean, look at what happens oftentimes when websites are set up to, reserve your, vaccination. I think now BC got it pretty good, and right now that system's working pretty good. But there's been plenty of times when other governments or BC in the past has had trouble setting up the apparatus, the infrastructure to administer such a program. So I think that's a strong concern, of important concern around whether vaccine passports are even if they could be defined, whether they're even plausible.
Yeah,
Thank you.
I think along with the I guess practical issues, there's sort of also this issue of trust. I guess with these sort of tech companies handling like your data and so on, and I guess the internet doesn't have like a good history of protecting people's privacy. So, yeah.
Thank you, Mark. And we'll touch on that topic again too. That's its own con argument there, and a pretty big one. So another con argument against vaccine passports is that how would vaccine passports be enforced? Would private companies or restaurants or places like hairdressers or whatever, all these places you go to, would it be an opt-in, opt-out kind of thing, like where some businesses will opt into these vaccine passports and then say, hey, you need to have a vaccine passport in order to get our service? Are they going to be more regulated? How is the government going to enforce this? That's another issue, and depending on the degree of enforcement, it could be better or worse off depending on what perspective you take towards it.
Yeah, but let's be fair about it, not overstate the the problem here, because I could envision a system where when people got their vaccines, they were issued some sort of, quote unquote passport, like a card or something, proof of vaccination, and then private businesses would be free to open only to people that had the vaccine card, the passport. So like restaurants, right now restaurants are forbidden from having indoor dining in BC, right? So one could envision that the rules would change such that restaurants could open indoor dining for patrons that presented a card. That's pretty simple, right?
Thank you, Michael. Yeah, I see what you're saying there. Let me move on to the next con argument, because then we're going to go into a discussion after this. So another con argument is that how long would vaccine passports be in effect? How long would they be around for? Would they be a temporary thing, and is there a promise that they would be temporary, or is it something that will be with us for a very long time or even indefinitely?
Yeah, well, that's not a con argument, it's a question. So you said it's a con argument, but then you asked a question, which is how long will they be around? But there's nothing inherent or innate in that question that makes it a con argument.
I guess you could say you can say like the reason I'm posing it as a question, because I don't really know, but there's people who say like they make it more of a con argument, and they say like, oh, we based on the track record of the governments and these private corporations, they will claim that it's going to be a short-term thing, but then they're just going to make it a long-term thing, and they're going to make money off of it, and it's going to become a part of our life and our culture, and we won't be able to get rid of it even if we don't want it anymore. That's the con argument out of it. I'm asking it more as a question because I personally don't know. Okay,
so that was the implicit argument in the question.
Yeah.
And my response to that is that it sounds to me like a conspiracy theory. There's a lot of guys making money on YouTube promoting those theories. Nicole, you and I watched one of those videos. Forgot the guy's name. But it's a fear tactic. It's a slippery slope fallacy. A conspiracy theory to say, oh, well, the government and corporations are just conspiring now to take away your rights, to take away your freedoms, and to get data of yours, and they're saying it's a temporary thing and it's going to be permanent. And I don't think there's any rational justification for that claim. I don't think that is a strong argument at all against vaccine passports.
Yeah, I agree with you on that, Mikey. I don't see there as being any benefit to like the government having to open up a whole new thing about issuing COVID passports and all. It's sort of like from like conspiracy theorists who say like that the government created the COVID virus or something. It's like what does the government gain out of creating a virus that will cripple their economy? They have no incentive to do this. So and it's quite the same with elongating, I guess, the use of COVID passports.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much, Mark. I'm going to move on to the next con argument, or even like a question here. Actually, this is a true con argument, I would say. So vaccine passports create a false sense of security because vaccines are not 100% effective and may never be 100% effective. And what that can do is that can make people overconfident. They can go in their communities and they can spread the virus onto people who either choose not to get the vaccine or cannot get the vaccine for many purposes, either because there's not their turn yet to get the vaccine, or because they can't get it due to medical reasons or other reasons. So that is one con argument to vaccine passports, is that they create a false sense of security. I know, Michael, you have thoughts on this. I'll let you start there.
A corollary to that is that we don't know yet, and science doesn't know yet, whether the variants, the mutations, will start bypassing or evading the vaccine. It's not known yet, but there is a distinct possibility that they will, which means that you could have a situation where it's related to this false sense of security. You could have people now congregating who've been vaccinated, and variants could slip in and begin infecting those people. And so there's an opportunity. So letting down the physical distancing requirements, allowing people to get in close proximity to each other again indoors without masks and so on, because they have passports, provides a breeding ground for the variants to take hold if they can bypass the vaccines. And also related to that is we don't know how long the immunity will last from the vaccines. The thought now, Pfizer and Moderna are claiming that the effectiveness will last at least 6 months, but they don't know how much beyond that. So it's possible that by the time the logistics of the vaccine passports are worked out and people start congregating indoors again, that their vaccines will start wearing off, and they'll have again a false sense of security, and it'll be a breeding ground, an opportunity for the virus to take hold again.
That's a great argument, Michael.
Yeah, I'd like to maybe respond to that, because my sort of view is that when I guess COVID first came out, right, there were many countries who did not go into lockdown, and in fact it was only like quite recently, until it became a problem, that most, I guess, countries went into lockdown. And in fact, such a pandemic like this has not happened for, I guess, a century, and there really wasn't any coordination to deal with this all. And in fact, I think that now that we've actually had this experience and such, we've already, now we have the infrastructure to deal with in place. For example, with the UK, Boris Johnson, he sort of fired their pandemic advising team when he came into office. And, that's not going to happen again, right? Because we've had this experience. And I think it will be much harder for a new variant to spread, considering that we've all these measures in place and we sort of know what to do now. And in fact, the quicker we roll out vaccines, the quicker and more harder it will be for variants to transmute. Yeah.
Thank you, Mark. So I'm going to move on to the next con argument. Yeah, so I think this was what Michael touched on too, but if we have a false sense of security with vaccine passports, variants could begin to evade the vaccine and create a new wave, especially if people begin to go on with their normal business. So that's a bit of a reiteration of Michael's point there. Another question here is, how long does vaccine immunity last? We touched on that. Yeah, so here, and then we also touched on this, but another con argument is that the virus can still be transmitted from a vaccinated person to a vulnerable population who isn't vaccinated, or who has been vaccinated and didn't develop immunity to the vaccine, because that's actually a thing too. So people who are, there's the clinically extremely vulnerable group here that we characterize in British Columbia, but and I guess within that, there's people who are taking immunosuppressive therapy or are immunosuppressed, and those populations are less likely to develop antibodies even when they get the vaccine. So the vaccines may be not effective on them or less effective on them. So sometimes you can even consider some of the vulnerable populations who do get vaccinated essentially not vaccinated if their bodies do not create an immune reaction to the vaccine and they do not develop antibodies. So even if we like envision that everybody has been vaccinated who can be vaccinated, there's still the possibility that a vaccinated person can transmit the virus to a vulnerable person who did not develop antibodies or does not have access to getting the vaccine or other reasons. So that's one counter argument there. I'm going to move on to the next one, and we were going to talk about this one because this is a really big counter argument that has been brought up in the popular media right now, is that vaccine passports are an invasion of privacy. And why should people's medical choices about their body be disclosed? And I think that's something that we should talk about because it is a very strongly argumented point in the popular media against vaccine passports. And does anybody want to start on this one?
I could a bit. I think the thing is that that argument is sort of portraying vaccination and entering the public as a personal choice, where I don't think it is a personal choice because it specifically affects others, and it can affect others in a terminal way. In fact, a personal choice is perhaps something like a religious choice, right? Where, just because you have specific metaphysical beliefs, that doesn't really harm or do anything to anyone else. However, not being vaccinated and going out into contact with others in the public is, I guess, something that gravely affects everyone else. So it's not a personal choice, really.
Thank you, Mark.
Yeah, with respect to privacy, I can read a comment from one of our viewers. She says, when I traveled overseas, I needed proof of vaccines to receive my visa. So it's widely known and widely accepted that to travel to certain parts of the world where there are diseases, that you need to get vaccinated in order to get your visa. And in doing so, you need to disclose, your medical information, whether you've had the vaccine or not. So I don't think it would be unprecedented to say that we have a crisis here, and so as a way to address the crisis, you need to, if you want to resume your normal activities with a passport, then you have to disclose that show proof you've gotten a vaccine. And you don't have to. No, we're not. Vaccine passports don't entail forcing people to get vaccines or forcing them to divulge information. It's optional. If you want to go to the restaurant, if you want to go to the movie, if you want to go back to whatever, then get a vaccine and show your passport.
Okay, yeah, this is a part where I want to jump in here because this is also an argument that I hear being mentioned. So it's the argument about what's considered necessary. So this has been an argument all throughout the pandemic. What is considered an essential service? What is considered necessary for everyday life? Of course, there are the basic needs, quote unquote basic needs, and that's also, kind of falls within the same kind of argument. But you need food, you need water, you need to be able to go to a grocery store, you need to have some form of income. That's kind of the bare necessities. But there's also arguments made in terms of, okay, what else is a necessity, right? Some people would say that exercise is a necessity, and for a very good reason for them, for their physical health, for their mental health. Exercise is a necessity to them. And now we can go outside, we can exercise outside, we can do things at home. And on the other hand, on a more, I guess, extreme level, but not really that extreme, is that some people will argue that being able to go to the gym is a necessary aspect of life for them, whether it be directly for their physical health, for their appearance, or for their mental health, or all of the above, or many other reasons. So there are arguments about what is considered a necessity. to people, and I am quite compassionate to those views, because of course there are the bare minimums for survival, but then there's also, we have to take into account people's mental health as well, because then you can also go into the topic that we might talk on in a future show, is that what are the long-term psychological and mental health impacts of the pandemic, and how does that impact your overall well-being, including your personal and physical health? That's a question that I have, and I do think that there is more to just food, water, money to life as well, and that's what's hard, because then you have to balance that with the pandemic.
Right, Nicole. So I'm going to agree with you and employ that as an argument in favor of vaccine passports, because no, I'm sorry, against vaccine passports. Sorry about that, because vaccine passports create a solution before there's really a solution. So people start resuming their normal lives. Some people start resuming their normal lives before the pandemic is actually over. What the goal here is to get rid of the virus altogether, so everybody can resume normal lives. And it's not guaranteed, even with vaccine passports, that will eradicate the virus. So you wind up with a significant segment of the population that can't avail themselves of those services that you've just said are maybe essential to people.
Thank you, Michael. That's definitely an important point that I think that I'm happy that we brought up. So I'm going to go over the next few cons here. We're going to talk about some of them in detail, and then we will kind of come together and give our own perspectives, because we're coming towards the end. So another con of vaccine passports is that it opens the door to fraud in terms of counterfeit vaccine cards. And there's ways to get around this. Let's say that there's one app that has been approved for vaccine passports. It'll be hard to counterfeit that app. But as we can see, I'll give an example of service animals and and more specifically emotional support animals. There are some reputable agencies that do give cards out for emotional support animals, but there's also many counterfeit organizations, and then there's not a lot of regulation and enforcement in that. So you can technically, let's say you have a cat, you can go on the internet and find a way to buy an emotional support animal certificate for $50 and say, if my cat is my emotional support animal. Even though, and hey, there are situations, and very valid situations, in which somebody's cat will be their emotional support animal. But people can go online and get these cards for $50 or even less and say, okay, there's this cat, my cat's my emotional support animal, when there are actual agencies that do it legitimately. So if we apply this to vaccine passports, depending on how it will be enforced by the government, this is there is some room for this kind of thing to happen, where there can be counterfeit vaccine passports. That's just something I wanted to bring up here. Another con argument is that on what level can people get discriminated against for having this data widely available, whether it be that they got the vaccine or they didn't get the vaccine. So, and in terms of getting the vaccine, let's say that, and this is a very low chance hypothetical, but there is a possibility that maybe there can be a rare complication from vaccines that some people might be more likely to get later down the line, that they'll find out later on in the long-term research. Even though there's some laws protecting against this kind of discrimination, there is a possibility that life insurance companies can discriminate against somebody for have gotten the vaccine. So that is one. If we're making this data more publicly available, there is that potential risk, but it is a hypothetical risk. Another thing that and I'm going to move on to the next con point here against vaccine passports, is that vaccine passports, and we've touched on this previously, but they discriminate against people who cannot get vaccines due to no fault of their own. Either allergy to mRNA vaccines, their children, their doctors advise against it. And this doesn't include people who choose not to get the vaccine. And the last point here that I think that we should have a little bit of a discussion about, because it's very philosophically oriented, is that another con of vaccine passports is that vaccine passports can be viewed as coercion. If you get this vaccine and you get the passport, you can then go on to live life normally again. That can be seen as a form of coercion. And the philosopher Immanuel Kant would say that this is a violation of the categorical imperative. This is a violation of your personal autonomy. And I would defer to these two experts I have here, Mark Giles and Michael Robert Caditz, Kantian experts. Just kidding, I know you guys are more well versed than I am. I'll start with you, Mark. Can you explain this a bit more?
Kant's viewpoint? Well,
yeah. Or
so,
how would it relate to coercion, and in this case, like the vaccine passport coercion?
Right. Well, because it doesn't, at least Kant's perspective on this would be that it doesn't really respect their choice and them choosing not to, in fact, take the vaccine. And he says we should look at them as rational human beings who can make their own choices, right? And by, trying to coerce them and give them incentives and de-incentives if they don't, then we're not respecting their ability to make choices for themselves. So that would be quite a direct violation of the categorical imperative.
Michael, feel free to.
Yeah, I would say good if it rejects Kant, because I reject Kant's view on this. Kant believed that the only legitimate purpose of the criminal justice system is punishment, is retribution. He was against rehabilitation. He was against restorative justice.
This is a straw man.
He was that's not at all. Kant specifically says, you'll have to read it. It specifically says explicitly that the only legitimate purpose of criminal justice system is punishment. Because rehabilitation is coercion. It's coercion, and so I reject that. I reject it, and I think it's legitimate to.
You're saying you reject this point because you reject Kant as a character.
No, I'm not rejecting Kant as a character. No, it's not. I'm not rejecting Kant as a character. I'm rejecting his view on this particular issue. I think that's wrong. I think that rehabilitation and restorative justice is much more legitimate purpose for the criminal justice system than merely punishment. And I respect Kant on many, many things. I agree with him on so many things. I agree with him that there's a such thing as synthetic a priori knowledge. I disagree with his view on criminal justice, and I disagree with his view on
criminal justice. We're talking about vaccine passports.
Right, but as Mark explained, Kant would be opposed to vaccine passports to the extent that they incentivize people to get vaccinated, because that's a form of coercion, just like rehabilitation in prison is a form of coercion. If you go to my rehabilitation classes, you can get out of prison early if you go do this thing. So I think that Mark correctly
that doesn't
stated
mean that Kant is against rehabilitation.
He is. He said he is. He's explicitly.
He's against. No. Okay, listen. Just because Kant is against rehabilitation in the context of the criminal justice system, it doesn't mean he's against rehabilitation as a whole. He's against using it as an incentive to get people out of prison faster.
Okay.
If there's a way to rehabilitate people without incentivizing it, I don't think that he would be against it in the same way.
I think rehabilitation is simply changing someone else's, I guess, mind, and. Well, maybe, I don't know, but there is a certain sense in which, that's only possible if you view someone as not rationally making choices and so on. And in fact, there is a I'll make this quick, but like when Kant first came out with his theory on I guess his ethical theory, right, with the categorical imperative and all, many people were critical of it and saying, well, if an axe murderer came to your door, right, and asked you where your son was because he wanted to kill them, it would be unethical for you to lie and prevent that, right? And then Kant wrote like an essay back. I think it's called on a supposed right to lie, and he's simply like, well, yeah, that would be wrong. You don't have a right to lie. So he's quite extreme in this sense.
Thanks. I think the time's about up.
We have a little bit of extra time because there's pauses, so we could probably cut forward when we're editing it. And you can edit this part out. But I'll just ask everybody here to give their final thoughts. You can talk for maybe about 30 seconds each, and then we can wrap it up.
I guess I can start. There's definitely many concerns and perhaps practical issues, right? Privacy, discrimination, and all. But I think that it simply just helps society as a whole to just sort of do the vaccine passports, and in fact, the people who would be missing out, they would be missing out on it anyway, even if other people had a vaccine passport or not. And I do sympathize with people who are skeptical of vaccines, because especially in this day and age with the internet and all, and simply how quickly the vaccines have been developed, there is of course many different sources of information and so on, and I can of course sympathize with people who hold a skeptical view. I myself don't.
Thank you. This is Mark Giles from the sorry, oh god, okay, you can cut that. But thank you, Mark Giles from Simon Fraser University. All right, and now Michael Robert Caditz, you share your last thoughts.
Yeah, I think after several discussions on this and weighing both sides, I think there's strong and some not so strong arguments on each side of the question, and I'm going to come down in favor of some iteration of vaccine passports, and I'll tell you why. I'll tell you the argument that sways it for me, that tips the scale. It's the possibility that we won't be able to reach herd immunity, and we won't be able to eradicate or almost eradicate the virus because a significant number of people remain unvaccinated by choice. So I believe that it's important to reach herd immunity so we can have a permanent solution, not just a temporary solution. So vaccine passports would be temporary towards the goal of incentivizing people to get their vaccines so we can achieve our permanent solution. And I'm looking at an NPR article right now which found that fully one quarter of Americans say I refuse to get a vaccine. And that may be a sufficient number if you add that to the people that cannot get a vaccine for various reasons, because they're children or because they have medical conditions. If you add that, that might be enough to prevent herd immunity from ever being reached. And then we're going to be in this perpetual state of pandemic and a perpetual threat. So for that reason, I think it's the overriding principle here is we need to get people vaccinated and eradicate the virus, and I think that vaccine passports are overall, all in all, on balance, a legitimate and rational way to incentivize people to get their vaccine.
Thank you, Michael. So I'm Nicole Kirigin. I'm here with Mark Giles and Michael Robert Caditz. Thank you for listening to the Canadian Philosophy Show.